I'm just going to try to establish a feeling of connection, first of all, very natural. And it's all about naturalness because the reflection is spontaneous. So that if you are in a happy mood, I may start off in a happy mood too, and you'll feel more comfortable with that. Because if you're in a happy mood, and I come off very officiously and authoritatively, you may feel a little uncomfortable with that. If you're in a very unhappy mood, and I come across like, like a clown, and I'm very cheerful, it's probably going to really annoy you because it's going to, it's not going to do much to establish the rapport. But if when I first meet you and I start, and I'm reflecting back to you where you're coming from, generally there's going to be less resistance because it's going to be kind of where you are, and you kind of know it. Sometimes if you're in a good mood and a friend calls you and they're really kind of unhappy, if you're feeling magnanimous, you may want to help. If you're really enjoying what you're doing now, you may say, well, can I call you? Because you may not want to spoil the mood. Whereas if you're happy and they're happy too, that's cool. If you're studying, you're really working hard, and your friend calls you up, come on, let's go to the movies. It's like, not now, I'm studying. But if you're in that very pensive mood and your friend sits down with you, and they're also studying something or in a pensive mood, it's going to be much easier to click because the two of you can find commonalities more easily. And that's what the reflection is all about, commonalities. I tell you, one of my strangest rapport stories was working in a shop that was run primarily by salespeople. It was a pre-press shop, it wasn't a shop, but it was a graphic design business, and I was on the creative side of things. I was managing the studio. We had a lot of salespeople, and we had this one salesman, and he yelled. All he did all day was yelling and screaming at people. You could always hear when he was in his office because you could hear the yelling. Pretty much his only mode of communication was yelling and screaming, and he would come in, and people would sheepishly kind of respond, is my job ready yet? He'd be yelling and screaming, and of course, his job wasn't even supposed to be ready yet. He just got to yell, and people would very sheepishly kind of say, yeah, it's not. And the more people tried to appease him, the angrier he got, and the more he would take it out on people. And one day I'm working, he comes in, throws my door open, and starts screaming at me, is my job ready yet? And I just screamed back at him, I told you the job's not going to be ready till 8 o'clock, and get out of my office. And the funniest thing happened. All of a sudden his face got very calm, and he just spoke very normally. He thanked me for the information, and while he still yelled at everybody else in the office, he always spoke to me in a normal, civilized way again. And the thing was, his mode of communication, for whatever reason, was yelling and screaming all the time. And nobody in the office was speaking his language. And the more he yelled and screamed, and the more people spoke calmly to him or appeased him, the angrier it made him. But when I yelled back at him, suddenly here was the first person in the office who knew what he was talking about. I was speaking his language. And he never yelled at me again after that. I thought he was nuts, but little did I know back then that I was using my, brilliant skills of rapport even before I learned this stuff. Anyway, so rapport to a certain degree means starting from the same place that the other person started. Presuppositions. Very often we go into a situation and we make assumptions about the person or the situation we're trying to impress on these people. One of the women who emailed me, didn't show up tonight, had a certain presupposition about dealing with men. When I deal with men, they won't respect me. I have to be more assertive because men won't respect me. Which men? If you come in with a presupposition people are going to fight you, it's almost going to be a self-fulfilling proposition. And then that's when she gets labeled as a bitch, because rather than starting from a neutral point, she's coming in with the assumption they're going to want to fight, and she approaches them, and these men, maybe they don't respect her, maybe they do, I don't know who they are, but there's no question that if she's coming in with a great deal of aggression that may seem misplaced to these guys, they're not going to take her seriously because she's gone too far. So it's always good to start out without too many presuppositions. It's good to know about the people you deal with and maybe to make certain assumptions, but you can hold those in check. And it's very important when you're dealing with people to always start out nicely, because you can always turn up the heat. You can always get more angry and more aggressive and more downright bitchy when you need to and really slap them against the wall. But if you start out from there, you've got no place to go. If you start out somewhere neutral and you're not getting the responses that you need, you can turn up the heat later on. You can always turn up the heat. But once you've gone that far, you can't go back. And at the same degree, if you start out like a welcome mat, you've got way much farther to go in order to get to competence or downright bitchiness if you need it. So it's good not to be too deferential at the same time. This is again where identity comes in. You have to feel that you belong here. You belong competent. Because you can always be nicer to people. Somebody's having a bad day, you can always go, well, that's all right, I'll ask you again tomorrow, But on the other hand, you don't want to be so far away from really pulling out the big guns that it'll seem disproportionate and people won't take it seriously. So as far as presuppositions go, it's good to know as much about the person you're dealing with when you deal with them, but don't let that color your judgment. Even if you know somebody is really difficult to deal with, don't always assume they will be difficult to deal with. One of the things I found in dealing with people who are well, suddenly coming to mind, somebody I dealt with who was outright nuts at a major ad agency I worked with, was that if I was behaved in a pleasant, professional manner, I never gave him the opportunity to get nuts with me. And while he threw chairs at other people, he always asked for my help, and he literally did throw chairs at people. But he always asked for me whenever he had a job coming up. I was the guy, because I always started from the beginning. And it's an interesting thing that very often how you approach any situation is going to dictate to the other person how to respond to you. So in that way, you're already being assertive simply by holding a strong frame. Holding strong frame with somebody, and you have asserted yourself successfully. When you have asserted yourself successfully, it's often good to reinforce and reward that, because it will make it easier to deal with them in the future. In business, people always bend over backwards for thank yous, thank you letters, whether they're deserved or not. Once you get someone to achieve something because something that you wanted them to achieve, a little bit of positive reinforcement goes a long way. So too much reinforcement, however, can have the opposite. A little bit of praise or a little bit of punishment works much more powerfully than a lot does. Because when you give too much praise or too much punishment, it may seem like you want something more. Also, after a while, if you continue to give too much praise and too much punishment, people become numb to it. But if the praise and the punishment is just a little bit, it always stays fresh. So as far as reinforcement goes, using a little consistently is almost always better than using a lot occasionally, because it may come across as insincere or insensitive. So let's get into the all-important thing of identity, because it doesn't matter whether we act like a doormat, or we act like a bitch, or we act like a competent person, if we're not that person.